Hey there, team. That was a nice little ditty. Haven't heard that one yet. I'm Haley Mirr. I'm the director here of operations at Mirr Ranch Group. Every other week, we're going to focus on different topics in our live stream series in order to educate future owners on how to be the best stewards they can be. Mirr Ranch Group, for those of you who are just tuning in, is a full service ranch real estate brokerage that also specializes in consulting. We focus on legacy ranches, sporting, and conservation properties around the West. Today, we're going to talk about property valuations and ranches as an investment. We will also explore the general role and value add nature of a good broker during both the acquisition and disposition process, especially in a crazy market like we're seeing today. Thank you to all of you that submitted questions. We'll try to get to them on this broadcast. Please feel free to ask your questions in the comments. We'll try to answer as many as we can during our allotted time, but if we don't get to them, we will answer them to the best of our ability afterward in our blog series that you can all subscribe to after this. Helping me out today, as always, is the founder of Mirr Ranch Group, Ken Mirr.
Hello.
Hey there, Ken. Hey. How are you? Good to see you again, as always.
Springtime in the Rockies.
Perfect. And we're really excited this week because we're going to be joined by one of the founding brokers here at Mirr Ranch Group, Senior VP Jeff Hubbard. Jeff has been a ranch broker with us since the beginning of Mirr Ranch Group, as you can attest to, Ken. I've known him for most of my life, actually. He has a finance degree and MBA from Vanderbilt and has had several commercial brokerage years under his belt and a lifetime of hunting and guiding. So without further ado, here's Jeff Hubbard. Hey there, Jeff.
Hey, everybody. How you doing?
Great. How are you doing?
I'm great.
Perfect.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Yeah, Ken, you probably have a lot of good stories of Jeff from back in the day.
Oh, well. I don't even know if I want to tell.
Yeah, we better tap dance that subject.
Yeah.
Perfect.
We're not ready for prime time here, right?
Yeah.
No, but very, yeah. He was day one when we started. We had a friend that we both knew, and knew Jeff back in Tennessee. So that's how we were put together, and we've been there ever since, dude.
And I'm sure, it's very appropriate. You guys have seen a lot of changes in this market space, specifically with ranches. So we'll kind of get into that a little bit later. But this is a really good subject matter for the two of you, because you guys are some of the best in the business when it comes to knowing what ranches are worth, knowing what the market is like. So we'll kind of get into some of that now. So the first thing we're going to focus on.
Gray hairs too, Haley. Gray hairs.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you
and that.
Yeah.
And a master of that.
Yeah.
Perfect. So the first thing we're going to kind of go into is the anatomy of evaluation. This is probably one of the biggest skill sets a ranch broker needs to have, not only with sellers or buyers, but if you guys could go kind of in depth a little bit about how we value properties and kind of the process of that.
Sure. How do you want to take a stab at it, or
Yeah. I think very simply, as you ponder the ranch space and what we deal with, it's pretty intuitive. You want to get the most for the least amount of money, just like you would when you're buying food or clothes or a car or obviously a home. That is the goal. The difference is what you want varies dramatically between people, and what you value is hugely variable. Mm-hmm. And then understanding whether the price is correct or whether it's what everybody else would pay, in an arm's length deal can be a challenge. And that's what we are here for. A lot of that you can get pretty scientific about on the valuation side. although it's way more difficult than it is, say, with residential or commercial or, equities, stocks, or whatever. But we're pretty good at it. And a lot of it is, comes from years of experience and having been involved in multiple transactions, all different types of transactions, different areas, different classes within within the ranch space. And I mean, that's an invaluable skill set. It only comes with experience and a lot of transactions. And not to say that a new broker can't be very valuable as well, but I think there's no substitute. It's cliche, but there's really no substitute for experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think back even when I got out of law school and I was working for land development, and your price points were, what that, ready, retail lots was of it, the pricing or square foot pricing based on just really simple data where, on our valuations, like when we do proposals or whatever, or we're representing a buyer, we break out so many different things, component prices based on the type of terrain, be it dry land, irrigation, forestry, other minerals involved, or water rights involved, public land leases involved, what kind of access it is, does it power, there are, and then what kind of hunting and fishing available. So some of these things can get a little subjective. So you're really trying to search hard and wide for comparable sales, even like, when we've dealt with properties next to national parks and things like that, that's a whole different enchilada too, because those are so rare when you find those. So you're not going to find something in the neighborhood necessarily. So you may have to reach out nationwide to look at things like that. So those are characters that you just got to pick up on and know, is this so unique that you have to, go beyond, like the neighborhood, and so we often are faced with looking at multiple states often at times, right?
Right. Yeah.
Oregon, Wyoming, Texas, you kind of trying to find what's comparable.
And I mean, it's so important. Even, we're seeing numbers today that are just crazy. Mirr Ranch Group, even last year, I think we had a ratio of 98% list to sale price. We're pretty good at what we do with our valuations, and we're careful because, we were just talking, Jeff, about how a listing can go stale if it's valued, incorrectly, and it needs to come down. So it is important how we value it at the very beginning. And then I guess, just kind of leading into the full conversation about, what buyers are really interested in right now is why are ranches, farms, sporting properties a good investment? Why would someone put their nest egg into a ranch property over, the market or other assets? I guess, Jeff, do you want to answer it first?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a lot of insight into, I started in this business with Ken in 2005. So I'm working on 20 years of doing this full time. And I went back and looked at this. This is a calculus that's sort of back of the envelope, but my experience has been that over the long term, now granted, this is not that long term, 20 years, call it, the ranch market and the land market in general, I would say, not just ranches, but farms, land east of the Mississippi, which we don't deal with a whole lot, but, is not subject to these wild swings in pricing or in value, or in strike price, I should say. If you look back at in my career, kind of the big shock to the residential market, for example, happened in 2007. The commercial mortgage-backed securities explosion, when we had a correction in the residential market of 15-20%. We in the ranch market sort of flattened out, but not really. I don't know that we ever went flat. We never went negative during that time period, and that was a crisis in the residential market. And I was impressed by the reality that our space did not, we didn't experience a commensurate crisis. Not only that, but I think we continued to slightly do better during that time period. Mm-hmm. Now, in the last 2 years, we've seen double-digit annual appreciation in the residential market. Things that we don't experience in our space. We have experienced good appreciation and a lot of, inventory absorption. We're losing inventory. Things are being bought up, and that's, it's probably as good now as I've ever seen it. I think that's kind of a function of a perfect storm of sort of global events and economic factors, COVID, of course. That's these matters. Mostly COVID has inspired people to want to have a place that's not in the middle of a high rise in Manhattan or San Francisco, where they can go and get away from all this. And then you couple that with crime situation in the cities, and then anxiety over inflation. I mean, nothing's more inflation hedging than land.
Right.
There's a limited supply. It's not a fungible asset. And I think people see it as attractive for many reasons, and that's been reflected in the strength of our market over the last 2 years, particularly.
I'd agree with that. Heck, I think back even getting out of law school, we were like dealing with the S&L crisis back then, and reflects how old I am. People are telling me S&L is, I think, a Saturday Night Live or something. No, it's S&L.
I did.
Saving so long. Thank you. But you go back to that, and in those cases, when you're dealing with like urban land and things of that nature, there was these high, pitches, highs and lows, and then as I started getting more into the ranch market and doing consulting in the 90s, it was always out there, but it always seemed like a very stable investment. And what I've seen now, probably 30 years, is what happens in some of these markets. Like I said, we've seen the pitches and valleys in the resort markets, especially in Colorado, with all those resort markets. And then any of the states that have them, they do go up and down. And what I've seen, while we won't have, like I said, the double-digit appreciation, we have seen it a few times. I mean, even this past year, I would say the ranch market could have been, as low as 8 up to 12% in some cases, depending on the location. But it wasn't the 30% that you've seen at the resort. But some of the advantages of having a ranch, though, too, is, as Jeff was saying, hedge against inflation. But there's so many things you can do with these properties, and especially the scale of them. Usually, they're uniquely sited, unique positions, and they could be, long-term asset for families and things like that. They can be. We've dealt with a lot of conservation issues with ranches and those deductions and tax credits and a lot of things that you can deal with that. The enhancement themselves, of what we can do to enhance the property, underlying value, if you want to keep it as a ranch, from the grazing practices and things like that, to fishing and hunting and improving those aspects, and and down to development. People, we've been engaged in some properties, and eventually that do, just by their very nature, growth is going to those areas because, but those are more rare in what we do. And then I guess there's also accounting practices in running ranches and what you could do as an owner of accounting and taxes and things of that nature. And it's really funny to think about it. You look at these, you can own 5,000 acres and still pay in taxes about the amount that I pay on an annual basis for my taxes, or in
less.
Right? Less, right? Yeah. So they're not huge carrying costs necessarily, right?
And I guess this. Sorry, you can go, Jeff.
Well, I was just going to say that's kind of a nice segue. I like to believe, and I think it's true, that by and large, the ranch market is not susceptible to these, volatile swings in value, either on the high side or the low side. But that's not to say that I haven't seen people get. And I don't want to be Debbie Downer here, but you certainly see people get burned on ranches, and by and large, that is a function of someone on the buy side becoming so emotionally attached to a property. And they tend to be people who have enough money that they're not really concerned with how well they do on the investment. It's purely a utility value kind of calculus for them. If they're going to love it and they've looked at a lot of stuff and this place just works, good for them. But to mitigate the odds of that happening for someone that cares about it, and most do, I think it's very helpful to try and get as scientific, as I said, and analytical about it as one can. And there are techniques for doing that beyond just looking at comps. There are certain features of properties that appeal to some people. There are other features that appeal to other people. And what you want to do is try and figure out to how many people does this appeal. And to give an example, when I started in the business, I was totally obsessed with properties that had big elk on them. So fishing properties, production properties. I mean, of course, I brokered them, but I didn't have the passion for those. And I sort of scratched my head at times wondering, the analysis says that this is okay for this person to buy this, but I wouldn't buy it, or I don't really understand. But now, as I've grown in the business and I've seen so many transactions, I truly do feel like I have a better feel for those who want to buy something to hike on, or want to buy it because they can see pretty mountains, or they want to buy it because they can be in Vail in 45 minutes, and they don't care if you've got 350-inch poles on it. They want to buy it because they want to ride their horses, or this is not particularly common, but they want to buy it because there's some income associated with the property. Another big thing I see with some frequency is one of the attractions of having these places, especially mostly in the Intermountain West, for folks who are from the South or Texas, or really anywhere east of the Mississippi. I mean, it's a place to go get out of the heat for a while. So
yeah,
these are all things that we pay attention to and we understand. And for some things are more important than others. Some people just want a fishing place. Some people want big bulls or big mule deer. And we understand these matters. And to the extent that we come up with comps, we're looking at other places who, for whom those features are prominent.
Yeah, it's
and I think that speaks to experience too, and how important that is when choosing a broker. I mean, to your point, some of these, our market space is getting bigger and bigger. So, it's really comes to who you work with when you're trying to figure out, as a buyer, how much this property is actually worth. Should I be purchasing this? Is it hitting everything I need? And because of, the experience you guys have had, and the all of the different valuations you've created, it's important for buyers. So I guess kind of leading into that, what should buyers consider when choosing a ranch broker for representation?
Well, I was thinking, as Jeff was talking too, when I was doing public lands consulting as an attorney, and we would do land exchanges and land swaps for clients. And at that time, there was like one journal or periodical that had listings of ranches. And I knew all the ranch brokers, right? And a lot of them were older gentlemen who, also helped sell and buy cows and did that type. I mean, that was their background. And there's very few companies out there. And then certainly now you see this proliferation of companies that just because they sell something in a resort town, they think they can sell a ranch or know what it takes, or we're seeing a whole mixture, right? And so, I find it fascinating because I felt like coming into the business that having my law degree was a necessity. And it's not necessarily but at the same time, as started working with Jeff, right? We worked together. We really got into things like, what's the title? What's the title report look like? Let's break that down. What's the access? I mean, there are things that you just don't know. You have to look at the ground to understand it, and then to read the water rights and getting into details about, it doesn't just matter how many acres are irrigated on the place, but what are the level, what are those property rights? You got to really look into those things, to dam issues and safety. And I mean, there is a whole slew of issues. And, you look at real estate. I remember somebody told me, you started your real estate company, that's the most litigious area, of a profession. And so day one, we decided we better learn how to do this and do the training necessary. So,
yeah.
That's
and
huge.
Haley, you asked kind of what we pay attention to beyond just the emotional response that a place gets from a prospective buyer. I mean, obviously, one of the reasons this space is sort of complex is because, we deal with a lot of issues in this part of the world that, say, someone from Texas or Tennessee or New York has no familiarity with. Specifically water rights. We have a limited amount of water in general in the Western United States. And to the extent that you use water, and I'm not talking about domestic water for taking a shower, drill a well for that kind of stuff, but watering food plots or watering an alfalfa field or getting water to your cows if you're running stock, there's a finite amount of that, and attached to the land in general is your right to do that. And right to do that can be difficult to analyze, because just because you have a right on paper doesn't mean you ever have the water. And if you don't have water in a lot of these places, it diminishes the value. These are sort of hidden, latent facts. Another example would be adjacency to and possibly connection to public lands, whether it's BLM, national forest, or state land. They're each very distinct. They come each with a different set of rules as it relates to who can use it, whether your neighbors can use it, to what extent you can use it. Can someone else come traipsing across the land that you lease? And if so, what can they do? Can they just hike? Can they hunt? Can they fish? Can they run their cows on it? And these are things that are sort of, I've seen it many times. I mean, they're just bizarre to someone from Texas. I mean, there's virtually no public land in Texas.
Right.
There's no BLM or national forest leasing. Maybe there's a little national forest, but anywhere east of the Mississippi or in the Midwest. These are matters with which we're very familiar and can help, cut the wheat from the chaff and explain them on a basic level, so they don't seem so overwhelming. And then, as Ken said, I mean, you got title matters. Generally, there's various utility easements, oil and gas easements, and associated access rights that are going to show up on title policies. And these are the kinds of things that make people's hair, they're bothersome and seem overwhelming, but everybody deals with it out here, and there's a way to get your head around it, and we can be very helpful in that regard. And then, of course, there's, to some extent, on most of these places, there's an operating factor. I mean, a lot of them are going concerns, whether it's hay production or grazing cattle. There can be income generated. Normally, it's not, I wouldn't call it de minimis, but it's not material in relation to the price, but yet it does generate enough income to cover some costs. I mean, it's not going to cover your note if you're borrowing money, but it can certainly pay for someone to run the place, which is almost imperative in everything we sell. I mean, unless you live there and are running it yourself, you got to have somebody, and that can be an overwhelming process. Things are always, I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, but many folks who are first-time ranch buyers, you know, they've got their home. They might have a beach home, a lake home, a little mountain home within an hour or two of their house. And even those places are full of headaches. But I mean, that's in New Jersey. You can imagine what a place in the Rocky Mountains is like. It's thousands of acres. I mean, yeah. So we
and I don't,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think even since I've been here, I've never seen a transaction where there wasn't something that came up. You know, everything has something, but you know, with people, with good brokers, those things are figured out, and it's, you know, with the right leadership, you can get through it. But
Yeah,
that's just the nature of it.
Even on a listing, you'd like to get title up front and look at the title before you start selling it, because lo and behold, you could be marketing a property for a while, then all of a sudden you realize, wow, I didn't have insurable access, or this, that, or the other. Mm-hmm. And you've been talking about, you know, some of the Forest Service BLM, you have these leases, and you can look at the leases and you can get those off of sites and kind of study them. And, you know, you can look at the animal unit months and you're going, what is an AUM? But beyond that, even with that, there are management plans on national forests, and so you have to look at those. And how are those managed, and what are they managed for? And including, and BLM has the same thing. So you know, the level of detail, I really think it's important, because not, you know, all properties are not created equal in our case. And I even remember, you know, you look at ponds and you think, oh, okay, a nice pond there, and then you got to look into it and you realize, oh my gosh, those are non-permitted ponds. Oh, and they're part of an area where there might be, you know, already a issue with drought, and those ponds may no longer be permitted because of challenges to those, because they impact hydrology in the area. So, you know, all that matters. So you definitely need to have the understanding of that both, and put yourself in the right place. I always talk about fiduciary responsibilities. Well, you're listing it, your fiduciary is to your seller, you're representing the buyer, your fiduciary is for your buyer. And it's really important to walk them through those things. And Jeff always said, you gotta take the emotion out of it a little bit, and, you know, understand what matters when you do these things.
Yeah. And that's kind of dovetails into, I was thinking about my career as I was preparing for this, and how we've generally had this steady appreciation in our asset class. I've been doing this long enough to have worked with buyers who buy a place and eventually turn around and sell it, and they ask me to list it and sell it for them. And I am probably too pessimistic on the buy side. I try and get my buyers a really good deal. And there've been many times in my career, I mean, where I thought, this guy's paying too much for this place, you know. So be it. He wants it, let him have it. And then 3 years later, he calls me back and it's worth X what he paid plus 30%. And I think, man, why was I so stupid about that? I will say that I can't think of a time when I thought, man, this guy, well, maybe with a few exceptions, is really, yeah, I have actually, where he's really getting a great deal. This is sort of a mispricing arbitrage buy. Those have been few and far between. I've always felt like it's either arm's length or he's paying a little too much, but I've been proven wrong in all of those situations, which is just a testament to the generally, if you're smart about it, to the safety of this space, this asset class as an investment. I truly believe that. Now, that's not to say that in those 3 to 5 years when they owned it, they didn't have a lot of headaches and frustrations and a steep learning curve. We try and mitigate that as much as we can on the front end. And sometimes that's the reason for them selling. Other times it's because they've made money on it and they want to buy something bigger and better, which is what you hope. And I've seen that a lot. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I said, kind of as it relates to a beach home or a lake house a couple hours from home, you know, you have to sort of anticipate these things that are going to happen. I mean, roads wash out, you got to replace culverts. Well, how do you do that? Well, you got to have an excavator and a skid steer to do that. Do you have one on site? No. What are those going to cost? What's the fuel cost to run the things? Who's the guy that's going to run it? You have turf conditions. You can be subject to the drought, where even if you're leasing it out, which is what I would recommend for most absentee owners, to an operator, not someone that is managing a ranch, but a third-party operator who will run the livestock and just pay you a fee, keep the fences up, If the condition of the turf goes bad, either because it's being overgrazed, has been overgrazed, or you're suffering from drought conditions, you need to prepare for that in sort of your pro forma as you go about the acquisition. On irrigated ground, ditches need constant working. You need a tractor to ditch poles to keep the ditches in good condition. Then you got to have somebody out there with tarps moving the water around. They need to have a good relationship with the state engineer, the water referees, to understand that they're complying with the laws and using the amount of water they're entitled to. It's just.
Can you tell that Jeff knows a thing or two?
I know. I'm learning a lot.
Right?
Yeah.
Just sitting here. Oh yeah. I mean, needless to say, buyers, they just need to be prepared for all of these things during due diligence. And what's great about you guys is, just like seeing now, you have a list. You have these checklists that a lot of people don't know about. Like, I've been working here, and some of the things you just said I didn't know about until just now. So I think it's crucial just buyers to be prepared and to have the things that are important to them.
Deferred maintenance will kill anything. So really, some of these things and some of the costs and things he's talking about, even when you sublease out or a property, though, that's the kind of responsibility of the lessee. So if you know that going in, it's not so much that. And what I find is most of the buyers who buy these things have a joy in understanding that, because they're like, it's like Johnny Appleseed. When you get to buy these places, most of them are like, what do I get to do now? And how do I get to enhance the value? Trees, the flora, fauna, all that is what you're doing. You are adding value, Jeff, right? I mean, that those things that may be normal conditional things, you are adding value. And in the end, you're benefiting from some of the natural resources. The reason why you bought it in the first place, because this is a limited commodity. These things, as I say, end of the road privacy next to the national forest or national park with a river going through it, forested, and a lot of elk. Everybody wants that, right?
Right.
And they're not everywhere. You don't have that opportunity. And heck, we were just with our GIS person yesterday, Haley, going over that mapping and comparing even just why valleys like Jackson and those areas are so much more valuable,
right?
Versus something like in southeast Colorado, where there's not as much impact in public lands. The rainfall is different, the patterns are different. All those things matter,
right? And I mean, even though it is a needle in a haystack, and we keep talking about how inventory is very low right now, we do have a large database of off-market and potential listings for buyers. So even though, you might get frustrated at what you're seeing online or things like that, we do know those valleys. We do know, I remember this property from when Haley was in high school, and but you guys do have that knowledge. And I think,
I don't throw anything out, right?
Yeah. Oh,
You've
yeah.
been in my office. I have these like books from 30 years ago about values on ranches. So when they come back, I go, wow, look at what it was back then.
Right.
Yeah. So Hub, I know we've got some experiences there, and just looking at those, that changes over the years. Yep.
Yeah. And I guess, just to kind of, I think we've kind of talked about the state of the market a little bit, but I think buyers and sellers are really wondering, is this a good time right now to still be investing in ranches? I know inflation is an issue. We just talked about inventory, but I still think it's a really good time for both buyers and sellers out there. Can you guys speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I do. I mean, these are uneasy, kind of uncertain times in general right now, and I think that reality of owning a place where one can get away and be very private and sort of self-sufficient is keenly attractive right now. I don't think that we are as vulnerable to higher interest rates as a lot of spaces are. Most of our buyers are still cash buyers. They see this as a place to park cash. Not to say that you have to be a cash buyer, but the consequences, higher interest rates. I don't think someone's going to decide, well, I want to buy a ranch, but now I can get 5% in munis. I'm just going to buy munis. I just don't. I don't see it as having a huge effect on us. What it may do is it may tighten up the equities markets and returns in the stock market, which if those go flat or even the wrong way, ranches look even a little better, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm optimistic about the farm and ranch market being okay, even with all of this uncertainty and war in Ukraine and political problems. I think it's still a very attractive asset, even at these frothier than normal prices, not near as frothy as commercial. And when I say commercial, I'm not including office for obvious reasons, but everything else seems to be blowing and going. And for the sellers, just a little bit of we kind of touched on it in the beginning, but a lot of sellers kind of know what their number is, and they call, they consult with us and they say, can we get this number? And usually we say no. We're honest with them, and they'll ask
aspirational.
We'll ask us to tell them what we think it's worth, and we'll analyze it to the extent that we can. And obviously, as a seller, what you hope is the buyer comes along, a buyer. A lot of times we'll have a seller, and I would caution sellers against this as they're thinking about unloading their farm or ranch. What you want as a seller is you want to not have to sell it. Most of our people don't have to sell these days. These are not the demographics of ownership of these places has changed so much that we don't have any desperate sellers, if you will, out there. So a lot of times the attitude is, well, I really don't have to sell this. I still kind of enjoy it, but if I could get X for it, I'd probably sell it. So let's put it on the market. And if their number X is what we believe is what it's worth plus 50%, the truth is we'll probably do it, but I caution sellers. Mm-hmm. And the hope is when you do that some buyer comes along, we make it look extraordinary. A buyer comes and sees it, and they have an emotional response. They see it as if, someone sees a Monet or a Rembrandt, and there's nothing else like it, and they have to have it, and they don't care if they overpay for it. Well, that's what you hope, and sometimes that doesn't happen, but it happens. It happens more than you would think. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's because most of our buyers are. Most of them have done very well in life and in their endeavors, frequently in business, and even, they just cannot bring themselves to overpay for something. And what ends up happening in the scenario I just described, if you don't have the Rembrandt buyer come along, the thing sits there, and mm-hmm. After some period of time, the buyer market and the brokerage market begins to construe that place as stale. I mean, that's sort of a simple word, but that's a good description. And then people just won't look at it. Then you got a problem. If you do want to price it high, I think the key is you got to be willing to the extent that you don't have action on it, people looking at it, or you have people looking at it and saying, this is great, but I'm just not going to pay that, or you have no offers. More frequently, we just see there's no action, nobody even looking. Well, then if you truly want to sell, then you got to adjust the price. I mean, it's real simple. And eventually you'll meet the market. But to let it languish out there, you end up trading for less than it probably would have been worth if you had smartly priced it.
Well, there's a point, I think, what I want to touch on too is even when properties get, higher than normal, or there's a lot of appreciation. So if you look at it, right, there's a 5 or 6% appreciation on a normal scale or ranch or farm. And we're talking Intermountain, which are way different than, say, farmland, in Indiana and Illinois, where, I'm from. So that's a whole different realm, different marketplace. We do deal with some hay ranches and things like that, that do produce extraordinary amounts of income. But those are fewer than say the bulk of our properties. But what I've seen, like for a long time in the West Slope, I don't know how many times Tommy said, the ranch market kind of rose, but not the same level as the resort market. And then the resort market crashed. The ranch market didn't crash, but there were fewer sales. The prices, people didn't, like, to Jeff's point, they didn't have to sell. So it took a longer period of time, maybe, especially for properties that just didn't have the unique attributes to come back. But I think whenever you have the really unique attributes, I mean, Jeff's sold, you sold the ranch with a 14,000 foot peak on it. I mean, right. That's unique. I don't know if you can do that. Maybe there's 2 ranches in the United States where you can have that, right? So when you have those particular elements, now you're a little bit better. Like, okay, I've got something very special. Trees Ranch next to Zion National Park, for instance. Those things are just so special. There'll never be anything like them, so they'll trade a little bit. But we do have a number of those properties that we're listing now that have those kind of attributes. So you just got to know what you're looking at, and both buyers and sellers just have to know what they have or what they're looking for. But so often our biggest problem is somebody will call and say, well, I could be in Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico. I mean, they keep running off all these states. And you go, well, we need to trim that down a little bit, right?
Right.
And figure out really what you want.
Yeah. Well, I guess just in closing, do you guys just see this market continuing to grow and to continuing to be a safe place for investors?
I do. Yeah. I mean, we may experience small bumps in the road, but as I look back on my career, as I said, I have not seen, in spite of what I expected at times, I've just not seen much in the way of depreciation in the underlying value of the land. Certainly in improvements, homes, particularly if they're not kept up. But I guess the upshot of all of what we've been talking about is I think a buyer and a seller in this very complex, very inefficient market, or asset class, space, whatever you call it, really, I think it's very smart to engage, whether it's us or someone else, a good broker to help in the process. And I'm not just trying to generate business. I truly believe that. And when you are trying to determine who is a good broker, I think intuition probably helps as much as anything. And then, you want someone who's honest. And there are some out there who, and I don't begrudge this, this is human nature, but they want to slam dunk a deal, whether it's on the buy side or the sell side. And on the sell side, that means listing it at a big number and telling you it's going to sell for that number when they know it won't. On the buy side, that means they see you fall in love with something and have an emotional attachment to it. And that's terrific, but just be honest with them about, don't expect to make any money on this. So
yeah.
Well, you can have a lot of fun with it in the meantime.
Yes, you can. Been a great career.
Awesome, guys. Well, I really appreciate you both taking the time. This was really helpful. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else did. And thank you for everyone who joined us. If we didn't get to your questions, we'll reach out to you directly after this. But let us know what topics you're interested in. We've been really enjoying these live streams and hearing from experts like Jeff Hubbard and Ken Mirr. So subscribe to our newsletter, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, guys. Thanks a lot. Have a good one. Thank you.